and thank you so much for joining me today for our session on sleep. Well, hello everyone, and thank you so much for joining me for our Lunch and Learn session today on how to harness the restorative power of sleep. So we titled this one From Pillow to Podium to kind of give you an understanding, hopefully by the time we are done, of not only the purpose of sleep, but things that you can do to actually measure your sleep and things that you can do. Hello everyone. I just want to say thank you to everyone for joining us for our Lunch and Learn session today. The point of today, hopefully by the time we are done, is to give you a better idea of what actually happens when we sleep, why it's so important, how not getting enough sleep can impact our lives, as well as how to measure it and some practical things that you can do to upgrade your sleep so that you are ready to shine and hopefully perform at your best every day as much as possible. So we're going to keep the slides pretty short today. The first thing that I wanted to talk about, of course, is why we need sleep. Sleep is one of the most important and yet most overlooked things that we do each day to mentally, physically recharge and really repair our bodies. So many things happen when we sleep. Some of the things that aren't even listed here, a lot of our immune system function, so many different things. But looking at, first of all, the mental and psychological purposes of sleep. So when we sleep, and really we need to get into that deep REM sleep for most of these things to happen. So one of the big purposes of sleep is actually mental capacity, memory processing, and storage. If we don't get adequate sleep, we actually can physically have trouble remembering things. Problem-solving ability, that's huge. So multiple studies demonstrate that when people are sleep deprived, even having less than 6 hours of sleep for even a couple of nights in a row, have a significantly harder time solving basic tasks, whether it's at work or navigating things in the car or things like that. It tends to hamper our even ability to make basic decisions. So once again, less than 6 hours of sleep a night tends to dramatically impact the decision-making center of our brain. So we're more likely to make decisions that we might not otherwise if we were operating on a fully well-rested body and brain. And actually, I think it was once said that operating actually on less than 4 hours of sleep could be considered the equivalent of trying to drive with a blood alcohol level that would be past the legal limit for a DUI. So that's pretty scary. And reaction time, that's really important. So not only our reaction time mentally, but also our reaction time physically, so both. So think about, there's reasons, for example, that pilots sometimes a flight gets canceled and there's nothing wrong, or it gets delayed even though there's no weather or there's nothing wrong with the plane. Sometimes that can simply be because the pilots have not been able to get adequate sleep. And we do not want people operating heavy machinery to have their decision-making and reaction time capabilities impaired. So think about, if you're driving a car and something, comes into your line of vision, you may not be able to react to it in time. Or even simply walking out your front door. Let's say something blows in your direction, or an unexpected neighbor's dog comes running at you, and you don't actually have the capability to react to that in time. That could be the difference between, falling or getting in an accident, or hopefully nothing worse, but those are some major impacts of not having enough sleep. So when we look at the physical ramifications of what happens during sleep, so for one, our bodies are constantly breaking down and rebuilding every single cell in our body. Did you know that every 3 months you completely remake your entire red blood cell? I want to call it population, but we remake every single red blood cell in our bodies. So think about that. Cells are constantly dying, they're constantly being rebuilt. A lot of that happens when we're asleep. So muscle tissue, of course, but really all tissue of our bodies that is constantly being repaired. Something else that most people will really notice is that when we don't get enough sleep, basic tasks can feel like they're a lot harder than they really are. So, for example, even just activities of daily living, even if it's just walking your dog or whatever, but let's say you're trying to work out regularly. If we're not allowing enough recovery time in between workouts, you will literally start to feel like you're working much, much harder than you actually are. You'll actually notice that in some cases it's harder to get your heart rate up, and it feels like you're working a lot harder. And in some cases, you'll even start to notice that your resting heart rate becomes a lot higher. So what that really translates to is that your heart is having to work harder than it should, even at rest. And that's a significant sign of what we would call overtraining. And a lot of folks might think, well, I'm not an athlete, I don't work out hard enough, that should be an issue. But if we combine any kind of physical activity along with stress, and then we pair it up with lack of sleep, absolutely anyone can end up in that overtrained state, because it really comes from overstimulation and inadequate amounts of rest. So how would you know if that's happening? Of course, most people wear smartwatches or some kind of device like that these days, and a lot of them will actually measure your heart rate. But if you don't have something like that, you could always, on a morning that you wake up and you don't have an alarm going off, so a casual wake up morning, you would simply just roll over and you would watch a timer, watch your watch for usually 30 seconds, just finding your pulse either on your wrist or at the base of your neck, just under your jaw. And you would count how many times your heart beats for that 30 seconds and then just double it. If you do that regularly and consistently, or you take note of what your resting heart rate is, and again, a lot of these smartwatches will do this for you now. They will tell you kind of what your resting heart rate is, your daily averages, and things like that. If you are noticing that your resting heart rate is even 5 to 10 beats higher than normal, that's an indication that your body is not getting rested enough. Some other really major considerations that I think a lot of folks are really not aware of at all, and there's so much research on this. We just cannot overemphasize the importance not only of sleep, but making sure we're getting the right amount of sleep, that it's deep sleep, and that if you do have trouble going to sleep, you may really even need to, despite some of the things that we'll talk about today, you may need to seek some medical guidance with that, because sometimes it could be something out of your control. But some of the things that I really want to make you aware of, as well as the things we already talked about, are all the metabolic processes and hormones that are largely regulated when we sleep. So number one is going to be growth hormone, and a lot of adults don't think they really need that anymore, but we actually do need that growth hormone for that muscle tissue synthesis and repair, like we just talked about. We also, most people don't realize that our thyroid hormones, our thyroid stimulating hormone, is largely regulated during the deeper phases of sleep. So most people will recognize the word hypothyroid as something that no one really wants to have. So one of the things that can actually cause our thyroids to slow down and not work as efficiently as they should is actually lack of sleep. blood sugar regulation, and appetite regulation. And so I'll talk a little bit more about that here. So insulin, without diving too far into what's actually happening there, insulin is what allows all nutrients to get into your cells. So we can be eating normally, but if the insulin is not working properly, our cells are not going to be able to take in all those nutrients. So what that basically means is we'll have a harder time regulating our blood sugar. We might have major blood sugar fluctuations, which can have a huge impact not only on energy but on overall health. So a lot of studies have really suggested that even young people is in as early as their 20s, if they are continually sleep deprived, even more than just a few nights of less than 6 hours of sleep, can significantly impair their ability to regulate their blood sugar. So that has lots and lots of impact that it's kind of hard to even capture in the short time that we have today. But further along that line, our major hunger and satiety hormones are largely regulated once again when we sleep. Those two major hormones, one is called leptin. That's our satiety hormone. So that is something that our body releases when it's signaled that we've had enough to eat. It's okay to stop eating, letting us know that we're full, we're satisfied, and we don't need any more. Ghrelin, the other hormone, major hunger hormone, metabolic hormone, appetite regulating hormone, stimulates our appetite. So when we don't get enough sleep, we have this like quadruple whammy with regard to our metabolisms. So our metabolism can in fact start to slow down, and the release of cortisol in our bodies can have an impact on that as well. But what starts to happen is our satiety hormones decrease while our hunger hormones increase. Sort of the opposite of what most people want. And then we may have an impaired ability to regulate our blood sugar. So that can do things like create cravings for comfort foods, for things that we might rather not be eating. And remember back to our decision-making ability, not having enough sleep impairs that decision-making ability. So if all of a sudden we feel hungry or we feel less satisfied, we might make choices that we might not otherwise make because we're tired. If you see where I'm going with this, it's a big vicious circle. And getting adequate sleep can actually help so many different metabolic issues. We can't possibly cover all of them in the short amount of time that we have here today. But I really want to emphasize that. And I'm sure everyone can imagine, a time, hopefully not too recently, when you really did not get enough sleep. And think about how you felt the next day. Not only trying to do normal tasks, but even, emotionally, how quickly maybe you would get frustrated with things. But also think about the kinds of foods that you wanted. Most people, when they're exhausted, don't tend to migrate towards healthy whole foods and lots of leafy greens. We tend to migrate towards things that are salty, sweet, savory, crunchy, stuff like that. So, of course, if anyone has questions, I can certainly talk about those at the end. But let's go ahead and now and talk about one of the things that's super, super important, and I really think that working in the virtual world has hampered this for many people in more ways than we probably realize, and that is our 24-hour circadian clock, circadian rhythm. So, and I want you all to think about this for a second. Have you ever been to Las Vegas? Well, if you've ever been to Las Vegas, even for a conference or anything, you know that they try to get you to go through the casino for everything. And when you're in the casino, there's no windows. There's no natural light coming in. That is very, very strategic and deliberate, because our bodies need natural sunlight in order to establish those natural wake and sleep rhythms. So if you see no outdoor light for a long time, your body doesn't know what time of day it is. You can stay up till all hours of the night gambling or whatever, because your body's not telling you when to shut down properly. So one of the most important things, two of the most important things, are that natural light both in the beginning of the day and at least at the end of the day. And a lot of times I talk to people all the time in our work from home environment who there's a real great tendency, unless they're getting kids ready, or there are folks that do like to get outside, to just get up, get ready and go right to work without ever going outside. And I'm not talking about skylights or windows. We actually need the real live sunlight, even if it's a cloudy day. So, especially for people that have a hard time getting up in the morning, going outside, moving gently, even if it's just walking to your mailbox, going to smell the flowers, taking your dog outside, whatever it is, that natural sunlight, ideally closer than the first 2 hours after waking up, ideally faster than that. But that provides our first, what I would call, anchor for our circadian clock. And basically, that initial anchor of getting that sunlight will cause our bodies to want to start to wind down around 16 hours later, which is kind of our normal wake cycle. But the same thing in the evening, if you can get out even briefly, that will help you to actually wind down. I guess another way to think of it is back in the day, if anyone ever went camping before the days of screens and things like that, we kind of started to go to sleep when the sun went down, and we started to get up when the sun came up. Technology has done, unfortunately, a lot to hamper that, which sometimes we just need to take some steps to counteract it. But another thing to really mention is that at night, with regard to our circadian rhythms, it's ideal to avoid any super bright light, primarily screens and things like that, between the hours of 10 p.m. and 4 a.m. So unfortunately, repeated exposure to bright light between those hours suppresses dopamine, and it can really affect how well we learn, our mood, our blood sugar, and things like that. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that here in a second as we start getting into some healthy habits. So I think the first one to talk about, and I've kind of alluded to it already, is having a routine. So this is a hard one for a lot of folks, and I can't deny this is something that I on and off struggle with as well. But that is, again, our bodies tend to want to be awake for about 16 hours. And if we tend to go to bed later and get up later on the weekend, especially if it's significant, that makes it much harder when we get to Sunday night to go to bed at a time that's going to allow us to get up when we want to. So letting our bodies know what to expect day after day can help to really stimulate that wind down sort of pattern towards the end of the day. So ideally, if we can go to bed even close to the same time on the weekend and get up close to the same time, that's going to actually help us a lot not to get overtired and feel like we're starting work behind the 8 ball on Monday morning. It doesn't have to be like if you're getting up at like 5:30, that probably doesn't mean you still need to get up at 5:30 on the weekend, but maybe you get up at 6:30 instead of sleeping until 7:30 or 8, because that could make it a lot more challenging. So routines, again, are very, very helpful, just establishing, triggering in our minds when it's time to wind down. Exercise during the day can be very, very helpful, whereas vigorous exercise too late in the evening can actually be detrimental to sleep. But exercise during the day can help our bodies crave more of that sleep and help you fall into a deeper sleep as your body seeks to recover from that exercise. So once again, those sleep and wake patterns can really help anchor our circadian 24-hour clock and make it a little bit easier for us to actually wind down when we're supposed to. So before we get into what to do right around bedtime, another big deal is setting up our space. And this is a tricky one, and I know especially in work from home world, and that is when we walk into our bedroom, wherever you're going to sleep, should be a place of rest and relaxation, ideally that's peaceful and tranquil. If you have your work laptop in your bedroom, or your bedroom's a really chaotic place, maybe there's just laundry everywhere or whatever, when you walk in there, it may actually increase your stress level, increase your blood pressure a little bit, rather than having a calming, soothing effect. So some things to consider with regard to our spaces, our sleep space. And I think, again, number one is trying not to do actual work in the bedroom. And I know, especially with young kids, it can be hard with regard to clutter, but I don't know about you, but if I walk into my bedroom and there's just a pile of laundry on my bed, I don't immediately think, oh, I'm going to wind down now. I think, oh my gosh, I have to fold all this laundry before I can go to sleep. And it kind of stresses me out. So, in some ways, a little bit of proactive planning can help to make sure that when we do walk into our bedroom, it creates this association with our mind that it's time to wind down. It's also really important to make sure that hopefully wherever you're sleeping is ergonomically correct for your body. So ideally having a neutral spine, however that is. For some people, having a weighted blanket can actually really, really help. Not everyone loves that, but it's something to try if you haven't before. A few other things to consider with regard to our space. So this is a hard consideration for a lot of folks, but consider making your bedroom a screen-free zone. There's a couple of reasons for that. Number one, the blue light that comes out of our screens, it's different than like a little reading light. And some people do really well with that, but it depends on the person. So just having those stimulating lights can really make it harder to fall asleep. They can stimulate your brain rather than signaling your brain to wind down. I actually encourage some folks, especially that have a hard time falling asleep and getting up, if at all possible, to charge your devices in another room, even if it's the bathroom or something else. But if you're setting an alarm on one of your devices, actually making it so that you actually physically have to get out of bed to go get it can be very helpful getting up in the morning. But also, any changes in screen light, our eyes can actually detect that even in a very dark room. So even though maybe you're not looking at your screen before you go to bed, if there are screen changes, someone sends you a text or you get some kind of alert in the middle of the night, those little changes in light can actually cause you to come into a less deep sleep or even wake up. So that's an important consideration as well. Some people do really, really well sleeping in a very dark room. I certainly do that, but then some folks have a harder time getting up that way. And if you're getting up before the sun anyways, it probably won't affect you. And I would really highly recommend trying that if you don't, like blackout curtains, things like that. If you're getting up with the sun, some folks will do a lot better if there's a little bit of light that can come in, because that sunrise will kind of start stimulating our wakefulness and the cortisol that we actually need to create the alertness that our brain needs to get out of bed. So that's a little bit more individualized, but just some thoughts if that's something anyone's struggling with. Something else is temperature. So ideally, we want to be able to burrow under our covers. If it's too warm in your bedroom, in your sleep environment, the tendency is sweating and kicking off your covers and things like that. Our bodies actually wind down much, much better if we're in a cooler environment. So think about setting your thermostat below 70 and making sure that you have a blanket with you. So that's actually one of the reasons we're going to jump into these other things, that like taking a bath before bed or even drinking hot tea can be helpful, because a bath will warm our bodies up. Once we get out, that natural cooling of your body helps it to relax and want to start to fall asleep. Likewise, different types of teas are known to have relaxing properties, but having some warm tea will warm our body up, and then as it starts to cool down, that will also help our bodies to relax. So we're going to go ahead and jump then into what do we want to make sure to avoid and to do really close to bedtime. So we've already talked about routines, setting up your space. Within a couple hours of bedtime, of course, this goes to setting up your space as well. Having a soothing noise can be very helpful. Some people like just quiet, but then if you have any kind of, startling noise in the middle of the night, that can wake you up. If you've never tried it before, like white noise, there's of course apps, there's like a rain app or just even a fan can really kind of start to produce a rhythmic state, things like crashing of waves, stuff like that, that can really start helping us sort of drift off. It's better not to listen to something that has words, because your mind will start trying to follow the words usually. So that can be really helpful. Soothing smells. Like if you love the smell of lavender or you love the smell of vanilla or something like that, having like a nicely scented little room freshener type thing can be really helpful as well. Some things to try within a couple hours of bed if you are having a hard time sleeping are things like progressive muscle relaxation. Um, Back to the routine, sorry, I'm bouncing back and forth there. But if you can prepare things for the next day, that will also help to calm your mind. So if you already know what you're going to wear, let's say you've got your breakfast and your lunch, if they're not ready, you know what you're making. That can be really helpful and go a long way too, even having clothes set out, stuff like that, so you're not thinking about that sort of thing. I've also found that having a pad of paper next to my bed can really, really help if you wake up and your mind starts racing, you start thinking about things. If you have that piece of paper there, maybe you have a small flashlight that's not an LCD screen, you could write something down if you need to, and then once you've got it written down, your mind can quiet and you can stop thinking about it. So again, that can be really helpful, even a to-do list if things pop into your mind. But relaxation breathing can be very helpful. Gentle stretching, especially after a bath, can be very helpful. Taking a casual walk later in the evening can be very helpful because it's very rhythmic, but you don't want to do like a hard weight training workout or maybe a hard run before you're going to go to sleep. Reading can be very helpful as long as it's not on a tablet, it's actually on a book. That can, those little things with pages, that can be very helpful. Some things to avoid. You don't want to be too hungry or too full when you go to bed. If you're starving, you're going to wake up because you're hungry. So if you're starving, having a really small snack, like a little bit of yogurt or, the old warm milk thing can be very helpful. But eating too much too close to bedtime can have the opposite effect because the processes of digestion will keep you up, especially if you have indigestion or anything like that. Caffeine needs about 6 hours to get out of our system. So if you're trying to go to bed at 9, if you're having, that late afternoon coffee, that could be really dipping into your bedtime. So we want to be really aware of not having too much caffeine, even later in the afternoon. And ideally, sometimes naps can be really helpful if you have a moment to lie down. Taking a long daytime nap can disrupt that urge that your body has to go to sleep later in the evening. All right, just a few action items here that we're going to talk about. And I think the first one is people always ask me, like, how do I know if I'm getting enough sleep? Or how do I know how much sleep I need? Well, it is going to vary from person to person. Adults typically need between 7 and 9 hours. How are you going to know? Realistically, gauging how much sleep you're getting or whether you're well rested, when you wake up without an alarm, when there's a time that your body wants to wake up almost every day, that's a really good indication that you've gotten enough sleep the night before. So even if it's a journal, you can journal your sleep, but I know PayPal has the Calm app that can help you track your sleep. Most smartwatches and devices also work very well to determine the amount of sleep that we're getting. What they can't tell you is if you're in like deep REM sleep, the different phases of sleep, things like that. If you've tried so many different things and you still have a hard time, I would definitely recommend speaking with a physician, because if there is something like sleep apnea or other conditions that you might not be aware of, there's probably things your doctor could help you with that might be a little more out of your control. But if you start noticing that you are lacking in sleep, like if you're always trying to get up with an alarm, you're not getting enough sleep. If you get up towards the same time every day and you feel pretty well refreshed, then you probably are. If you're not getting enough sleep, try thinking about 1 or 2 things that you can implement and upgrade. You're probably not, most people don't do real well just overhauling things all at once, but if you can pick 1 or 2 things that you can try to implement and try them for just a couple weeks and see how it works. If it starts helping, maybe you can implement something else. If it doesn't, then maybe we kind of try to reassess that. If there's things that you could do, possibly 1 or 2 things that might upgrade your sleep environment or quality, or even changing routine, just think about what just few small things that you might be able to do. And a few things that I will throw in there If you are trying to get up earlier, and that's challenging for you, you're trying to shift when you go to bed and shift when you get up, try like 10 to 15 minute increments at a time. It's going to be really hard to go from like waking up at 7 to waking up at 5:30. That's a big jump that you can probably do once in a while, but it's going to be hard consistently. But if we can adjust by 10 or 15 minutes, it's a lot more manageable. Your body's not going to be so rebellious about it. And then after a week or two of that, perhaps you can add more time. So maybe you try 15 minutes for like 4 or 5 days, and then maybe you try another 15 minutes. And then kind of reassess after a couple weeks. I think another really important thing is to recognize our why. Why do we want to improve our sleep? Like, why is it important to us? What benefit is it going to give us? Because if we can keep that in mind, it might help making some of these implementations or upgrades a lot easier to actually stick with. So with that, I do think that I have talked with everyone now for about the time of our session. You'll notice here I linked a few more additional resources, just a great article and a couple of handouts that might be very helpful for you. So at this time, I'm going to go ahead and stop screen sharing, and I would love to address any questions that you might have.